Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. Today we're going to talk about and thoroughly investigate and analyze an unheralded aspect of this game that you have been widely misled about, something nobody ever really discusses. Let's talk about two-hit rolls. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons uses attack matrices. It's very simple. You find your opponent's armor class, you cross-reference that to, in this case, fighters, paladins, rangers, bards, and zero-level halflings and humans. A first-level fighter needs a 20 to hit armor class of 0. For every step down the armor class makes, it gets easier by 1. Then you roll the die and you apply your modifiers. Wait a second. There's an important note regarding two-hit adjustments. This process is far more complicated than you realize. You might want to wait to the end of the video to comment that I've forgotten something, and then if I have, by all means. But we're going to cover a lot of the weird conditionals. I'm going to start in the middle of this paragraph because we have some things to consider. Changes must be made to the armor class of the figure concerned, not to the dice score rolled in attacking. In modern iterations of Dungeons & Dragons, you roll the d20 and you lather on a whole bunch of modifiers. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, you apply modifiers to the armor class, not to the die roll, and that is very important for a number of reasons. It's not important for other reasons, and that's probably what gave rise to the modern iterations of THAC0 or base attack bonus as used in 2nd edition and 3rd edition, respectively. With that out of the way, we're going to assume all adjustments are made to the armor class so that we can turn our attention to the weapon versus AC table. It looks like this. It is on page 38. Before we talk about how to use it, let's understand why we use this table. And later we'll talk about when. Simply put, some weapons are better at opening tin cans, and some weapons are better at opening leather hide, and some are better for punching through chain or chainmail, as the case may be. That is what this table is meant to reflect. Before you can use any other modifiers, you are just comparing the physical reality of what happens when Mr. Battleaxe meets Mr. Well, hold on. And this is why you have to start here. Don't worry about dexterity. Don't worry about magic. Just worry about the bladed weapon against whatever the armor class type is. On the previous page, we learn that if you're wearing no armor, or maybe you're just holding a shield, you're at armor class 10, and with a shield it goes to 9. If you are wearing chainmail, you are armor class 6. If you add a shield, it goes to armor class 5. In fact, let's take a look at that real quick. If you are wearing chainmail and a shield, you're at armor class 4, and with chainmail, you are at armor class 5. Use this table alone when you are comparing the weapon versus the armor type. For example, a battle axe, as we can see, cuts through cloth. The modifiers listed in this table should be applied to the armor class as we discussed. When you are dealing with a guy holding just a shield, or if he has light leather, treat each armor class as though it were one higher. Battle axes are not good for opening tin cans. If you're attacking a man in plate armor, his armor class of 5 should be treated as, 3 rather, should be treated as an armor class of 1. The armor class of 3 has a -2 to that. Well, what do you want to use to punch through plate armor? If we scroll down, we find that a lance with a heavy horse is granted a +3. Now our guy in plate mail has an armor class of 6. Maybe you don't have a horse. That's fine. Use a pick. That punching weapon will punch through the armor. However, it's very heavy, it's unwieldy, and a guy wearing simply leather or cloth armor will find it easier to get out of the way. We're at a -1. Another interesting artifact is what happens down here at the very tail end of this chart. It's a little hard to capture because of the crease, but I want to show you what happens when you have a flail and you go up against a guy wearing no armor. You have an armor class adjustment of -1 in the case of the footman's flail, meaning a man with no armor whatsoever should be treated as though he has an armor class of 9. What if he has a shield? the shield will actually get in his way. Your heavy ball and chain is going to whip right around that shield and conk him on the noggin. With a +1, that shield is a liability. His armor class is treated as a 10. The same thing is true to a lesser extent for the guy on a horse. If he's using a horseman's flail, then he gets no bonus. If you're on foot, you'll be able to dodge. This makes perfect sense. If you get confused about whether these bonuses should be applied to the AC or like a +2 means the armor class goes up, you can always remind yourself, and thanks to the commenters for pointing out, that down here where you see, here we go, the longbow, hello Agincourt, makes mincemeat out of guys in plate mail. There's no adjustment whatsoever. It's one of the few distance weapons for which that is true. If you're wearing less armor than that at chainmail, your guy in chainmail with no shield is going to be treated as an AC of 5. We can also see the same thing at work when we have a quarterstaff. A guy with a stick beating on a guy in heavy armor, this is AC 3, should treat that armor class as a -2. Add a shield, that -2 becomes a -5. Armor class of 2 -7 is a -5. It's actually a little easier to beat a guy over the head with a wooden stick if he's not wearing armor at all. That's all you do. Once you have figured out, so one way to think of it is, this is the actual armor class, apply the adjustment. That is the effective armor class. A footman's mace going up against a guy with plate and a shield is going to be treating him with an AC of 3, not 2. His effective armor class is 3. Now we can go in and we can start applying some of these other modifiers. But before we do that, I want to point out the strength of the bastard sword is that it can be wielded one-handed or two. If you're using it one-handed, you treat it as a longsword. And what happens with the bastard sword is that swinging it two-handed gives you lots of bonuses up here at the, call it the lower end of the AC scale. You may want to wield it as a two-handed sword when you are fighting, because with a longsword, see, you're at more negatives down in the AC 2 and 3. So you may toss your shield aside, and the beautiful thing about a bastard sword is that you can decide whether it's one or two-handed. For the same encumbrance penalty, you can just take one weapon. Now, this is important because it opens up a lot of possibilities for fighters. A guy who has one or two weapons, and that's what this chart says up here. A cleric only gets 2 weapons. A cleric is also less likely to get this beefy encumbrance bonus. Look at all these extra coins that a fighter will be able to carry. Remember, every class maxes out at 18, but a fighter with an 1876 strength can carry 150 pounds worth of stuff. That means he can take 3 or 4 weapons, and when we encounter an enemy who's in heavy armor, he can use that two-handed sword against him. See, +2, +2, +2. If he goes up against guys in the mid-range, he can identify which weapon he wants to use, given the situation. A cleric doesn't have the same amount of flexibility. A cleric will have 1, 2 items, and he's done. Likewise with a thief. Not using this table nerfs the fighter, and may be one of the reasons that people think fighters are boring. Fighters don't have a lot of options. They only don't have options if you're not playing the game according to the rules. If you're not using the weapon versus AC adjustment, if you're not tracking encumbrance, then that would be true. But if you're using the rules as they are written, fighters are right where they should be. But as I said, do you always use this table? What happens if you're fighting a creature like, in my current campaign, a cave bear? What is the armor type that you use? On page 28, we find weapon types 2-hit adjustment note. If you allow weapon type adjustments in your campaign, if you allow, this is not required, please be certain to remember that these adjustments are for weapons versus specific types of armor, not necessarily against actual armor class. This is why we don't apply dexterity modifiers. A man in chainmail with a -2 dexterity adjustment has an effective armor class of 3, but you do not use the plate mail armor type when you're using the weapon versus adjustment. But we were talking about when to use these. Monsters not wearing armor will not have any weapon type adjustment, as monster armor class pertains to the size, shape, agility, speed, and or magical nature. Not excluded from this, meaning included, would be an iron golem. However, monsters with horny or bony armor might be classed as plate mail if you decide, but do so on a case-by-case basis. Naturally, monsters wearing armor will be subject to weapon type 2-hit adjustments. In other words, an ogre might have thicker hide than a human, but if he's wearing a chain hauberk, then you're going to treat the weapon 2-hit as against chainmail. In the case of Gary says, in the case of bony or chitinous hide, you may use the plate mail adjustment. In the case of a bear with a thick, shaggy coat, maybe you treat that as leather armor for the armor class adjustment. Do so on a case-by-case basis. This game has all kinds of room within the rules for allowing a neutral referee or dungeon master to come to these sorts of decisions about how to treat combat. With that out of the way, we can turn our attention to the attack matrices. Here's where you have your opponent's armor class versus the die roll needed to hit. You've applied your weapon versus AC adjustment, if you are using that, and if it is appropriate given the target. Now we can think about things like dexterity bonuses. With a high enough dexterity, your adjustment to your effective armor class will be at a -2. This will reduce your AC. If you have an AC of 4, that -2 means that your effective AC will become an AC of 2. You as the target are affected. If you have a high enough dexterity to have a bonus to your attacking adjustment, that +1 will give you a +1 to the target's armor class. I'm shooting at a guy with an armor class of 6 after all of the weapon adjustments. Now I factor in my dexterity bonus. His armor class is a 7. In this case, whether you have adjusted the armor class or the die roll makes no difference. If I had no adjustment, a 15 would hit an armor class of 6. A +1 to the die roll would mean a 14 showing on the die would hit as well. My 14 becomes 15. I'm still hitting an armor class of 6. If I apply that +1 adjustment to the armor class, the 6 becomes 7, and a 14 on the die roll still hits. It doesn't really make that big a difference, unless it does. And to understand why it might make a difference, we have to track up, in the case of the first level fighter, to this zone right here between a target armor class of 0 and -5. And this becomes very important. Important enough that Gary specifically calls this out in the paragraph we started with. An inspection of the combat tables, what we're doing here, will show that the dice roll progression will make some opponents hit-proof if the dice rolls are adjusted downward rather than the armor class being moved upwards. Our first level fighter is fighting an opponent with a -1 armor class. He needs a 20 to hit. If we have a +1, there's no change. He still only has a 20 that will hit. In this case, adjusting the armor class makes no difference in how hard it is to hit the opponent. However, if we add the 1 to the die roll, suddenly rolling a 20 means that he's capable of hitting an opponent with an armor class of -6. Instead of, so again, let's take that moment. If he's fighting an armor class with a -6, brother, you got bigger problems than this. A first level fighter taking a swing at a guy with an armor class of -6. I get it. This is an edge case. But I think this is illustrative of why you adjust the armor class, not the die roll. Let's assume that we're up in the 8th level. Now we have the option. Our 8th level fighter is going to be attacking a guy with a -7. Oh, look at that. It maxes out at 20. Even with all of the bonuses, instead of, right, I'm attacking a guy with a -7, a 20 is all that hits. If I've done all of my adjustments here, that's very different than saying, well, listen, I'm attacking a guy with an armor class, an effective armor class of -7. If I have a +5 to my die roll, well, that drops it down to here. Now I'm effectively hitting an armor class of -2. That's a 14. Well, my 20 goes to 14. That's a +6 to the die roll. More importantly, over here at the 5th and 6th level, and these are diagonal, so it applies equally on the 1 and 2, but if you have a +1 to the die roll, that can be, and you're swinging at a guy with a -4 armor class, or you don't know what his armor class is, that +1 becomes an effective +6 unless you're adjusting the armor classes. In modern day parlance, let's take a look at the whiteboard. Forgive the crudity of the model, it's not to scale. In modern day parlance, if you have a situation where you need a die roll of a 10 to hit an armor class of 10, if you have a +1, the difficulty increases at a linear rate. You need one lower result on the die. For every step that the AC goes up, the difficulty goes up by 1 step on the die roll. When you have an AC of 0, you need a 20 to hit, a THAC0 of 0, if you will, using modern iterations. Alternatively, a base attack bonus of, 0, meaning you need a 20 to hit that armor class of 1. But when you get into this range, it stays linear. It goes up by 1 step on the die for every step on the AC. In Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, something weird happens when you hit the 20 mark. You go up at the same 1-to-1 progression. And in here, in this range, adjusting the AC by 1 along the x-axis is functionally equivalent to adjusting the to-hit roll by 1 on the y-axis. You just move along that line. But when you get to the 20s, I need a 20 to hit, that repeats 5 times. The 20 appears 6 times. You have the first 20 and then 5 more, and it's not until you hit this point that you resume that 1-to-1 progression that parallels what happens in the other. And that leads to some rather interesting effects. Because when you're fighting in this zone right here, it's difficult, but not too difficult. It takes a lot more effort to reach that 21. You can't get a 21 on a 20-sided die roll. This now becomes unhittable in most circumstances. Because modern-day versions of Dungeons & Dragons always adjust the die roll, it's a lot easier to get up into this realm of 25 on the die. I rolled a 20, and I've got a base attack bonus of 5. I can still hit higher levels. In fact, this whole region of the chart has been completely eliminated in most cases in modern-day iterations of the game. When a 22 hit roll is treated as an auto hit, you always have a 5% chance of hitting, no matter how difficult the shot. That's not the case in Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. You become unhittable when you've reached this zone. And we've been looking primarily at the fighter table, where the 2 hits are the easiest. But what if you look at something like the Thieves? That 2-hit zone, that unhittable zone, starts at -5, and it persists even up to level 9, where at an armor class of -10, a thief has no hope of hitting. And that can happen, it's not easy, but it happens. So the question is, if usually it doesn't make any case, why do you always apply your adjustments here? And the answer is because that way, if you're always applying it to the adjustment to the AC, then you don't have to worry about which edge of this break point you're on. You always do things in the same manner. However, it is also worth pointing out yet another exception to this rule. In the Player's Handbook, Gary offers this little nugget. Magic Plate Mail +3 and a Magic Shield +5 are equal to AC -6, or can be treated as AC2, with a subtraction of 8 from attackers' 2-hit dice rolls. These are functionally different. If your armor class is 2 and you adjust it down to the -6, you become unhittable for a first level fighter. For our first level fighter, swinging at a guy with a -6 armor class, he's in the unhittable category. If you apply the modifier to the die roll instead, in other words, he's attempting to hit an armor class of 2 and he has a -8 to the die roll, let's look at the attack matrix. For our first level fighter, he remains unhittable. We have to roll a 20 is the best we can do, and 20 minus 8 is 12. You can't roll a 26 on that die roll. You're still unhittable. But what if our total adjustment was 7 points instead of 8? Well, in this case, our first level fighter now hits on a 20 if we've adjusted the armor class. Whereas if we adjust the 2-hit die roll, that hitting an armor class of 2, we would need to roll a 25 in order to hit, because he needs the 15, because he needs the 18. You'd have to roll a 25 in order to get a total result of 18. You see the difference? You see how that makes a difference? To further complicate matters, Gary contradicts himself somewhat, and I think this is where most people stop. Penalties and bonuses may modify either the die roll or the number needed to hit as long as one method is used consistently. And that may be the key here. It doesn't matter how you apply these modifiers, whether it's to the roll or to the AC, as long as you do it consistently so that everyone at the table can plan accordingly. That you're not swapping in and out, whether you're adjusting the AC or the die roll, and on what's most advantageous for you. That is the meaning of the barracks room lawyer. How I interpret the rule depends on what's advantageous for me. No, consistently apply the rules. Take the hit where you've got it. When you're in the 20 zone, don't apply it to the die roll when it suits you or to the armor class when it suits you. One last thing I should point out to further complicate matters, going back to the paragraph that kicked off our discussion, this important note regarding 2-hit adjustments begins by saying certain spells, such as curse, prayer, protection from evil, adjust the 2-hit of either the attacker or the defender or both. So does this whole paragraph only refer to spell use hit adjustments, or can this be applied all over the place? I'm not here to tell you the right way to apply it. What I am here to tell you is that you should have a discussion with the table to decide how these are applied. Are they all applied to AC? Are they all applied to the die roll? Some have interpreted that to mean that the player-facing adjustments, a thief's backstab ability, the character's dexterity bonus, should be applied to the player's side of the ledger. In the case of dexterity bonus, apply it to the thief's dexterity, or the character's dexterity. In the case of a strength bonus to hit, apply it to the die roll. My character is trying to hit you, I get to apply that +1 to the die roll. For something like the 2-hit adjustment for AC, that is on the DM side of the ledger, or the magic spells are on the DM side of the ledger. You apply those to AC. As long as you're doing it consistently. The rules are complicated enough that there are different ways to read individual passages, certain individual passages within these 3 tomes. However, I do think it's important to point out once again that a difference in interpretation of the rules at your table, consistently applied, does not mean that there's no right way to apply any of these rules, nor does it imply that a difference in interpretation of one rules means that all of these rules are open to interpretation, that none of these rules matter, that there's no wrong way, and that nothing really matters. That's a dangerous road to go down. Don't go down that road. Even if you go make 30-minute videos teasing out all of the little nuances of 2-hit rolls, that is an exercise worth going through. I still remain surprised that this is the first video on YouTube. And by all means, correct me if I'm wrong. Show me a link to somebody that talked about how easy AC versus weapon adjustment is. Show me a link to somebody discussing this chart right here, the zone of 20. I'd be really interested to see it because in all my years of wandering on this now bleak wasteland of the internet, I haven't seen it. It's worth thinking about. It's a complicated game. It gets into your head. You think about it when you're away from the game, when you're away from the table. That's part of what we love about it. Man, it's just great, isn't it? What a masterpiece. Hey, I'm done yapping at you. Till next time, I'm praying for you.